Welcome to This Is Not About Your Body, a body neutrality podcast where we talk about all the real shit body image issues are actually about because they are never just about the way you look. I'm your host, Jessie Nealand, and today I have with me Dacy Gillespie, who is an anti-diet personal stylist and owner of Mindful Closet, where she teaches women how to release the patriarchal standards that they've been conforming to so that they can uncover their authentic personal style. And her work beautifully aligns with my definition of body neutrality. It's very focused on helping people understand that no matter what shape or size body they have, they deserve to have clothes that fit, that make them feel good, and that express their unique personal style. Now, since one of the body image complaints that I hear the most often from clients is either I just don't like the way my clothes fit or I just want my clothes to fit better, I am really excited to have Dacy on here today to talk about breaking fashion rules, discarding the word flattering, and developing a personal style. So welcome, Dacy.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. I'm going to have us start with the basics. And can you tell me a little bit about yourself and your business?
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Dacy. I always say it's like Stacy, but with a D because it's very hard. Um, and yeah, I actually am a former classical musician. So that was kind of my first career. And in my mid 30s, I got really burnt out and decided to try and find and reconnect to the things I really loved and the things that people were asking for my help with. And that was clothes, essentially. So I started my business, Mindful Closet, in 2013. I am married. I live in St. Louis, and I have two young children. They're ages 5 and 9.
Awesome. Now, what exactly is it that you help people with? Like when a client is coming to you, what is it what problem are they trying to solve or what are they struggling with?
Well, it's interesting, and we talked a bit about this in our first conversation. But it's really interesting because people will often come to me with kind of a surface problem of, oh, I just don't know what to wear. I just don't know how to put outfits together. But what we end up doing is really uncovering the messages they've been given from society, from their mothers, from social media about how they should, and I put should in big air quotes, how they should dress their body. And the reason why I want to work through that with every client is because my ultimate goal is to see this as practice for them in listening to their own needs. And so again, when you kind of have these shoulds around what you should wear or how you should dress, you're really paying attention to some external advice rather than kind of looking within yourself and listening to your body about how things feel.
I love that. Okay, so in your experience, how have most people been conditioned to think about clothing and style? Like when they're getting dressed, what are they generally focused on?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I mean, most people have really been conditioned since like very young childhood to focus on what's flattering.
Mm-hmm.
And so every time they get dressed, they're essentially worried about how to make themselves look smaller or how to make themselves appear the most pleasing to others' eyes. And so that's really where people come in because we've all read the books and the articles and taken the quiz on the fruit that applies to our body and, all these different things. And really working through that is something that's really hard and really
Yeah.
important.
So most people then, and this seems really obvious, but I don't know that a lot of people necessarily even think about it, that they view the purpose of clothing and style as looking good for others, basically giving other people the most positive, pleasant, whatever experience. And therefore, we have this word flattering that basically means closest in alignment to that positive, pleasurable experience for others. But I don't even think people generally realize that that is how they're approaching clothes or style. Like people don't go
Mhm.
around thinking, I mean, maybe they think I want other people to think I look good, but they're not like, ooh, I get dressed for other people's experience, not mine.
Yeah, that's so true. I hadn't really ever phrased it that way exactly. And I think it's such a subconscious thing that's such deeply conditioned
Yeah.
in us that's where I feel like my work really can help people move past some of that, because we really like take it apart and we really look at it and say like, okay, what is it exactly that you're worried about other people thinking?
Hmm.
And can we start to prioritize how you feel over how you appear to someone externally?
Yeah. So you help people kind of recenter themselves in the experience of clothing and style.
Mm,
So I gave this TEDx talk years ago where I talk about the two most sort of biggest compliments you can give a little girl aren't actually about her experience, they're about other people's experience. Like
mm,
a little boy, you can say he's brave, he's strong, he's funny, he's smart, whatever it might be. It's sort of about him. Little girl, you say she's pretty and she's nice. These are the two
mm,
biggest things you're supposed to be
mhm.
complimented on. And both of them center another person's experience of her. So there's a huge gendered component here
Oh, for
that,
sure.
not to say men don't also think about what's flattering, but there's definitely a sense that, like, if you're born assigned female at birth, if you're a woman or a femme, your job is to create an experience for someone else.
Yes. And first of all, I love that. I'm going to have to go watch that TED Talk. But it's incredible that you're kind of phrasing it that way, because, we're recording this on a Monday. On Friday, I had a session with a client who grew up with three older brothers and basically just played with boys, like essentially thought of herself as a boy growing up. And clothes meant nothing to her. She never thought about it. She never worried about it
Interesting.
until, of course, she turns 18 and goes to college and then starts,
Oh,
seeing
wow.
like, oh, I'm not really doing what the other women are doing. And so it's just fascinating. Yeah, the way that it really is imposed. And she was lucky, by the way, that she had a mother who also didn't care, because that wouldn't fly with a lot of
Sure, yeah.
people,
That's shocking
like,
she even got to 18.
right, yeah. And so, it really is imposed at such an early age. And unfortunately, at those early ages, it's usually by the mother or a family member.
Mhm.
And of course, we always have to remember like those mothers were raised in this air we
Yeah.
breathe of, conforming and being pleasing and, the ideal
Yeah.
standards of beauty. So it really goes back generations.
Absolutely. So tell me more about this word flattering. Before
Mm,
going into why it's problematic, I just want to
mhm.
hear a definition, if you have one, for like what do we mean when we say flattering exactly?
Yeah, well, first a disclaimer, because I always get pushback when I talk about rejecting the word flattering,
Yeah,
because many people will be like, oh, but flattering means to me that I just like it, or it just
sure,
really suits that person, or whatever. And I get that, and that is the case sometimes, but
sure.
generally, the conventional usage of the word flattering is, when you really break it down, is, oh, that makes your body look smaller, or as small as possible, or even smaller than it is. Essentially, you're creating a good optical illusion with your clothing. And again, that pleases the external eye. And
I do want
yeah,
to say though, because that is for women, but because these things are gendered, uh, for a man, couldn't that optical illusion be about looking maybe not big in the sense of fat, because of course
mhm,
fat is never understood to be pleasing to the eye, but like bigger, taller, muscular, something like
mhm,
that, it's still an optical illusion. So
absolutely.
it's just about creating, yeah, sort of manipulating people's perception to be pleasing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to lose my thought from
Oh,
before, but
sorry.
this is where always the Sonia Renee Taylor's hierarchy of bodies comes in for me, which is when we dress to appear as small as possible or to show a certain ratio of proportions, we're attempting to move ourselves up that ladder, right? We're attempting to move
Mhm.
ourselves as close as possible to whiteness, to, men, and in some ways it's a human need. Of course, we
Yeah.
all want to belong, but I think once we can kind of look at that and acknowledge it and reject it if that's not something that's important to us, then we can really kind of use that energy in other ways. And just to go back to the concept of flattering and why I really believe it's I believe it's harmful in the process of developing your own style. And
Mm.
I'll tell you the reason for that. A lot of people grew up watching the show What Not to Wear. And of course, they were really dictating, like, you must wear this for your body type. And even many years later, even after Stacey London, who has evolved on many things, she's really like talked a bit about the harm she did through that
Hmm.
show. But
Interesting.
even still, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, I heard her on a podcast interview, and the interviewer said, "How do we start to develop our personal style?" And she said, the first thing is you have to look at the shape of your body.
Mm.
Like, and that just blew my freaking mind, because I was like, wait a minute, we don't have any control over the shape of our body.
Yeah.
You're telling me this thing that I have no control over is supposed to dictate the clothes that I wear? Like, what about what I like? What about
Hmm.
what I like the look of? What about what pleases my eye? And so when we're striving for flattering, again, we're really prioritizing this, conforming to the ideal standard of bodies.
Yeah.
And we're really not looking at our own needs or preferences or wants. And just to give you like a practical example, this is one I always use, the conventionalism for someone who is pear-shaped, which means they are proportionally larger on the bottom, which is meaningless. It just is a proportion of body
Yeah.
part to body part. The conventionalism is that person should wear like a defined waist, a full skirt, to
Hmm.
kind of hide the offensive larger lower body. And when you picture that, I know it sounds crazy when you say that, right?
Yeah.
When you picture that, you think like very feminine, like, oh, defined waist, full skirt, dresses. And what if this is someone who has no desire to dress in that type of feminine
Yeah.
style? You would have prioritized making your body look as small as possible over truly your comfort in your skin.
Uh-huh. By the way, you just described me and my entire experience of growing up and being told that because I have an hourglass figure, like all of these styles that would be most flattering on me
Hmm.
made me want to vomit. And
Right.
even though I followed them to the best of my ability for a very long time, understanding myself now, my gender identity is non-binary. I use they, them pronouns. It gave me so much freedom to be like, oh, like, it's actually a legit choice just to say, I don't like that. I never have. It's not a part of who I am. And I no longer need to highlight my waist.
Right.
I
Right.
get to wear
Exactly.
boxy shit if I want and oversized things that swallow me up because I'm petite,
Hmm.
all these things, right? Oh my God, yes to all of that. And if it's not flattering, essentially what we are now saying with this understanding that you've just given is I am not conforming to the body and beauty hierarchy that would earn me status and approval in society. That's literally all
Hmm.
it means. Because it
100%.
is pleasing to me to see me in
Hmm.
oversized, boxy things.
Right.
Someone's
Yeah.
still being visually pleased. It's just not that.
Right. Right. And, I mean, I think a lot of that can be summed up with, I think a lot about how are we dressing for the male gaze, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so much of that can really be attributed to why we are told to wear certain things,
Yeah.
which in itself just makes me kind of vomit in my mouth a little
I
bit.
know. So there's obviously so much fat phobia, weight stigma in this word flattering. There's sexism, patriarchy, because the idea of like essentially what you want to be as a woman is as small as possible. But as you just said, there's also, I think, the idea that it earns us male approval in this very odd way because I feel like a lot of men don't like fashion, like
Hmm.
there's the whole
Hmm.
thing about rompers, right? Like women love rompers, men hate rompers, but yet still somehow we're supposed to be dressing to the male gaze. I don't know, or like high-waisted pants or something. It really isn't about any kind of individual thing. It's like a vague sense of how we have value to men or how men, not as people, but as a sort of social force, want us to be.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I think we could call that patriarchy,
Yeah.
right? It's just, yeah, this idea, which, I mean, I know we're, many of us here listening probably familiar with Sabrina String's book, Fearing the Black
Mhm.
Body. And of course, she traces all of those what we think are just ingrained biological preferences for a certain kind of
Right.
body, she traces all of that back to, of course, hundreds of years ago and racist, origins.
Yeah.
And, but that is, again, kind of what we as a culture understand to be attractive.
Yeah.
And particularly, that's what we understand to be attractive to men.
Yeah. So there's something in this I think is really interesting that you described, like a lot of the flattering idea is about creating this optical illusion. And for women, that tends to be an optical illusion of attractiveness in this male gaze space. So basically, and I know people think of this word as super negative and would not want to use it to apply to this situation, we learn to manipulate men into
Mm-hmm.
liking us
Mm-hmm.
based on our hair, clothing, makeup, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something in that that I think is like pretty dark and we don't
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge.
100%. I mean, I think that again, like, is what I'm striving for and helping my clients strive for, which is the idea that we do. Of course, we're socially conditioned. It's never going to go away. We're always going to have some part of that wanting to fit in, but as much as we can to figure out what is authentically us and
Yeah.
authentically our preference, because then, even, being in relationship with a male, we ultimately want to be authentically ourselves, right?
Right.
And so, this is a weird thing. I don't think I've done a million podcast interviews. I don't think I've ever said this, but one thing I think about a lot is the thought that if, and I'm going kind of off into like beauty standards,
Sure.
but one thing I've often thought is if I became terminally ill, or I for some reason was in the hospital for a very long time, or at the end of my life, um, if I were not able to keep up with all of the maintenance that women are expected to do, uh, how different would I appear in these settings where I may
Uh,
be dying or very ill? And my thought is always like, I want that to be as little difference as possible to how I normally look.
ooh, that's a super interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
isn't that, it's kind of
It's like
strange.
authenticity, but through a way that people would definitely normally not think of it.
Yeah, yeah. I just think of like what happens when all of that goes away. The
Uh-huh.
the lashes and the manicures and the
Yeah.
makeup and again, I have full compassion for every woman living in this society and truly feeling like they're doing that for themselves, um, without necessarily being able to trace it,
Yeah,
to
yeah.
kind of patriarchal standards. So I have full compassion for all of that, and for how vulnerable so many of us feel, in certain
Yeah.
situations. But yeah, that's just something that I think
Totally.
about a lot.
So I believe fully in like bodily autonomy, full stop. So everyone can and should do whatever the hell they want. There are no right and wrong choices, no body neutral or not body neutral choices. But I also believe in the power of making those choices consciously. If you're like, I get my lashes done and I dye my hair and I do these things and I wear a full contour, like that's what I do to earn the privilege that I need to get the career I want,
Exactly.
to get the, lack
Hmm.
of marginalization, whatever it is.
Exactly.
Like 100%.
Yeah.
There is a difference between doing it from that place versus
Yes.
this is what gives me worth, so I have to do it.
Yes. And thank you so much for bringing that up, because I always try and put a disclaimer on any of this talk. The more marginalized you are, the more letting go of conforming to these things could potentially harm you. I
Yeah.
mean, if we think about Black women in the workplace and their
Hmm.
hair and what's been required of them, I mean, there's literally legislation so that people can't discriminate against Black women in the workplace
Yeah.
because of how they style their hair. If you are non-binary, and are showing up in a certain way that feels authentic to you, you know, that is potentially dangerous.
There
I mean,
is
I think
so much privilege in being able to break these rules safely.
exactly. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
just always want to make sure that's very clear. And I will also
Yeah.
say that I find, or I believe that those of us who have more privilege, you and I were in essentially, straight size bodies, and, maybe show up or maybe appear to others, in a certain way. I believe that the further we can push those standards and the
Yeah.
more we can try and push the boundaries when we know we're not going to get harmed.
Mm-hmm.
But by us pushing the boundaries, hopefully it will eventually trickle down to make
Oh,
moving those boundaries
totally.
safer for others.
I could not agree more. I also want to mention, like, there is there is a cost to operating with this illusion in the world. There's obviously a benefit. You're going to get more privilege, status, approval, whatever. But there's a cost too. And for most of the people that I work with, the cost is a sense of constant fear and anxiety that people are going to find out the truth about how
Mm,
they really look
mm,
if or when they were to stop following these rules, conforming these
mhm,
things, doing this beauty labor. So,
mhm,
like, I know for me, I used to get so anxious about a new guy I was dating seeing my
mhm,
face without makeup because I
mhm,
was even though I wasn't wearing a ton, it was still like
mhm,
I felt that I had tricked him into thinking I had longer,
mhm,
darker lashes by wearing mascara, right?
mhm, mhm,
And that created anxiety. And I always tell my clients, like, your dating app pictures, of course you want to look as pretty, as good as possible, whatever. But on the other hand, if you put up all your best pictures, you're going to be anxious as hell going into date one.
mhm.
If you show
100%.
up on date one looking hot in all these ways that is like labor and illusion, you're going to be
Yeah.
anxious as hell on date five, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's stressful. It comes with a cost.
It really is. It's so funny. This is something else that I haven't really talked about. This conversation is amazing. It's bringing up so many things for me. I've been married for 13 years now, and was with my husband for 5+ years before that. And I see, on social media or in my community, I see women who are uh, in the phase of wanting to get married or about to get married. And I do really think, like, you know, once you're deep into a long term relationship, the amount of energy that you want to expend on some of that stuff, it's hard to be in a long term relationship. It requires energy and work. And I just kind of want to, like, whisper to them, like, just slow it down now. Cause right now it's like you're
Right.
doing all the things you want to, you're getting married and just know that 5 years from now you're not going to be doing all this stuff. Like, just let me
Right.
let me tell you. But
God, that's so true too, because I used to be a personal trainer and I trained so many women through their wedding. It was like this whole thing. I
mhm,
was in New York City, right? So, like, what a bummer though later to look back and
right,
go, the thinnest,
right,
tannest, hottest, like,
right.
I looked so good that day and I love
Mhm.
these photos and I feel like trash about how I look now as an actual
Yeah.
human in the world.
Yeah, there's really that contrast and that come down when it's
Yeah.
not something that's sustainable that you're doing.
Yeah. Okay, so tell me about fashion rules.
Mm,
What are some examples of the rules that someone might learn to follow based on body type, shape, size, whatever, for how to
mm,
dress or, yeah, how to
mhm.
wear clothes?
God, I don't know where to start. I mean, there's as we talked about, if you're petite, you can't wear cropped pants. I was literally just talking to a friend about that the other day. If you are in a larger body, you need to wear clothes that fit closer to your body so you don't appear bigger than you are.
Hmm.
If you, I mean, this is a rule that I had to rebel against myself, but wear more color, just wear more color. Like, no, actually, I don't want to. Actually, I feel
Yeah.
super, I'm an introvert, I'm a very quiet person. I'm supposed to wear red because of my coloring, and I feel like a traffic light if I wear
Yeah.
red. I just don't want to do it. I mean, we could go on and on. Define your waist, hide your bigger hips.
Yeah.
Try and downplay your
There's so much
cleavage.
about creating lines. It's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of creating lines.
Mm-hmm.
Hiding flaws, highlighting assets, and creating lines feel like the
Mm-hmm.
fundamental rules are all sort of based in that
Mm-hmm.
space. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say I had a client once who came to us, a personal training client way back in the day, came to a session. She was like, sorry, I like couldn't change. And she was wearing 6-inch heels. And I was like, holy shit, look at your shoes. And she was like, oh, I know. I have to wear shoes like this because I'm only 5'3". And I was like, well, I'm 5'3".
Yeah.
I didn't know that was a rule for us. And she was like,
Right.
oh, well, no, you, and of course had like a whole
Yeah.
thing. Like, it's
Right.
different for people like you. But yeah, she fully just brazenly stated that if you're
Mhm.
5'3", you need to wear 6-inch heels.
Yeah, yeah, it's wild. I was just going to comment on the thing you were saying about lines because that's actually one of the factors that I will look at in determining someone's personal style. Um, I always have my clients collect images on Pinterest before we meet with very specific parameters, and those parameters are to go on gut instinct. If there's something that you just feel, oh, that's cute. Oh, I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
Like there's some sort of emotional reaction to it. That's what I want you to save before that censoring voice comes in. And the censoring voice that we all
Mm,
hear when we see a garment in a store that we like, or we see an image of an outfit on someone that we like, the censoring thoughts come in. I could never wear that. I'm too
yes.
big for that. I don't dress up enough to wear that.
Yeah.
All these things. So anyway, so that's how we create the Pinterest board, is by trying to turn that voice off. It's very, very hard.
Yeah.
But then when I will look at the collection of images that someone has put together, one thing we talk about is line. And again, I just,
Mm,
it is a choice. You can
hmm.
decide that you like, I call them wavy lines. That means when a garment has a lot of movement, or you can
Hmm.
decide that you prefer straight lines. And that means typically a garment is
Oh,
very tailored and more structured. Right now, a lot of people are really liking this, what I call like relaxed lines, which is, kind of fits somewhere around the shape of your body, but there are a
yeah.
lot of uh, it's not super straight and tailored. So I
Yeah.
just thought that was something
But
interesting.
even hearing you talk about that, it's so clearly different from what I
Right.
learned about lines, which is that optical illusion, male gaze kind of thing. Like if you're short, you have to appear taller. If you're wide here, you have to appear. Da, da, da. It's like
Mhm.
very, very much guided through the lens of the person's own experience, which is kind of the whole point of what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Learning how to not dress for the male gaze,
Hmm.
learning how to not dress for like other people's experience, but for your
Hmm.
own. Lines are real. They can still be real. They just
Hmm.
don't have to be used as like a manipulative tool.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and by doing that curation, we can also see for instance, I'll give another example. I had a client, I do a group program, and I had a client in one of my group programs one time, and she put together her Pinterest board, and it was all, I would say, lots of wavy lines. There was lots of movement. There was lots of soft fabric. And if you just kind of envision this, flowing fabrics in the wind, and there was a lot of
Yeah.
print, but a muted color palette, more like earth tones. And so typically what we call that is like bohemian or
Sure.
something, And so I was like, oh, well, very clearly, here's your style. And she said, oh, yeah, I've always loved bohemian, but I just never thought I could do it because I'm so petite. Like
Mm,
you said, it was like, oh, I always
yeah.
thought that would swallow me up. And I
Yeah.
was like, again, here's a case of someone like completely ignoring what they
Yeah.
like because of this body they've been given by no choice of their own.
Right. Do you know what's so interesting? I've always loved clothing and style. Definitely when I was younger, I loved it for the validation it could afford me and also as like a self-expression creative thing. But as I've gotten older, I feel like layer by layer by I've had to unpack each rule almost individually. There was
Yeah,
never a moment
for
where I was like, I'm
sure.
going to throw all these rules away. It was like there was a day where I realized, the only reason I don't wear blazers is because I think it'll make me look top heavy or
Mm.
whatever, right? And then it's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, shit, how do I feel about blazers then? I don't know. Now I have to go on a little project to
Right,
find out.
right,
Each
right.
one individually impacts you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the bulk of what I do
Yeah,
with my
it's so
clients is
cool.
like, let's pick apart all of this.
So I'm curious, like, how do you understand the difference between a person's authentic preferences and likes versus what they've been conditioned to prefer and like? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how do you help them identify the difference? Because so much of this stuff is just gonna be up there.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like we were saying. I mean, I think it's impossible for any woman in our society to completely divest from this stuff. Like,
Yeah.
I think that's reality. Um, so again, we do this exercise with the images, and I will talk through them with all of them. And people often give a lot away, when they're
I
speaking
bet,
about
yeah.
something. I'll say, why do you like this? And they'll say, oh, XYZ, but this or that.
Yeah.
And so we learn a lot that way. And again, my job, I feel like, is just to be a guide and just to be a noticer and say, oh, okay, well, this is how you just, worded that. Have you thought about that? Um, And then there's always going to be a fine line between putting that style into practice versus just seeing it, just seeing it and I like it. And so,
Yeah.
you know, and so a lot of what we do is experimentation as well, which I think is just something anyone who's thinking about their personal style is
Yeah.
just going to have to do. And so I do a lot of trying on with my clients. We do a lot of shopping and we do a lot of trying on. We don't do much buying.
Mm.
And literally anytime you put a garment on your body, there's something to be learned, either about your
Uh-huh.
preferences or about that type of garment, whatever it might be. So it is a balance that we just work on. I mean, I work with people over 8 to 10 weeks, so we're
Yeah.
just kind of going through this slowly. A lot of people will really, I used to do these in like more intense chunks of time, these sessions. Actually, that was mostly pre-pandemic when I was doing a lot more in person. Now I only do
Yeah.
virtual, and so we would do a lot in a few hours. And then I really intentionally was like, no, we need to break this apart and space this out so that people
That
can
makes sense.
process.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of that comes through. I will write follow-up notes to every session that we have, and people will just write back and be like, oh my God, I just never thought of it that way. And I'm just,
Right.
again, I'm recapping what they told me.
Uh-huh.
But it gives them a lot of clarity.
You know what I love about this is we we are inclined to follow rules, even if it weren't for the status and privilege and all those things that it earns us. We're inclined to follow rules sometimes just because it's like easier to have a system and know exactly what you're
Absolutely.
doing. And
Yeah.
the alternative can feel very daunting because it's
Hmm.
basically, I don't know, everything is a grand experiment, see what happens.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's a lot less structured and clear and,
For sure.
just
Well, I think, we've talked before about how much intuitive eating and my work kind of have
yeah.
similar, just philosophies or things to think about. And really, food rules, people like them sometimes
Yeah,
because it's
yeah.
like, well, if I can eat whatever I want, I don't even, first of all, I mean,
Yeah, it's
when I went through the
overwhelming.
intuitive eating process, I was like, what do I like? I have no idea what I
Yeah.
like to eat. But then, yeah, it's like, well, I could eat anything. Well, it feels
Yeah.
very out of control, right? And
Yeah.
so similarly, I know that that's why people buy how-to fashion books. I know it's why they
Yep.
follow Instagram accounts that are like, here's how you style this. And I get that. And I know
Yeah.
that that is overwhelming. And I will say, certain divergences, neurodivergences really do need some of those boundaries.
Mhm.
So how I think of it is like, we're going to try and figure that out, as we are working together. And then by the end, if that's something you feel you need, we can build that for you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Based on
Like,
the internal
exactly.
feedback.
Like,
Yeah.
if you just don't want to think about your clothes every day, great. Let's find a uniform for you that works.
Yeah.
We're going to invest a lot of thinking and a lot of effort up front to take
Mhm.
that out of your daily thought process later. And conversely, of course, there are people who just love experimenting with style,
Yeah.
and that's just what they want to continue doing. And that's also equally valid.
Yeah. And it's so cool, I think the sort of analogy here with intuitive eating is that when you start the process, if you've been in diet culture, you've been following these external rules for a long time, part of the overwhelm is just it's a lot. It's overwhelming. It's stuff you haven't ever had to run through your own, self before. And part of it is that you don't consider yourself a reliable source of information about what you want or like or
Absolutely.
need or yeah, like when to eat,
Yeah.
how much to, you don't think of yourself as trustworthy.
Yep. Yep.
So you have to go through the process. It's why it takes so damn
Mm-hmm.
long to
Mm-hmm.
rebuild that trust as you
Mm-hmm.
experiment and discover things, get that feedback. Like
Yeah.
it's always when we talk about intuitive eating and someone gives me the pushback of like, well, if you didn't, use discipline, you would just like eat Pop-Tarts every meal, whatever. I'm like if you gave a 3-year-old even the least disciplined person ever, right? They're going to get a bellyache and decide not to do that too often, right? Like there are built-in mechanisms we can
Right.
trust.
Right.
And I
Within us.
within us, and it sounds like that's what you're offering people, even if ultimately they do like structure, they don't want it to be like a constant creative experiment. You get to build it based on those cues.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it is really still pointing them back to the fact that their preferences can be trusted. Their
Hmm.
ideas, their likes, their comfort, all of it is a trustworthy source of information. You don't need a book or an
Yeah.
Instagram account.
Yeah. I mean, I think. I mean, I see my work as being an entry point into the practice of listening to yourself and listening to your
Yeah.
body. But again, especially women particularly, conditioned in this patriarchal society. I mean, we're told over and over, don't listen to that. I mean,
Yeah.
we're literally told, like, I mean, I just think my mom was a teacher, and I just think about teachers who can't go to the bathroom. Like, they
Right.
literally have
Right.
to ignore their absolute urgent bodily
Yeah.
needs, because the way the system is set up, it doesn't allow for like that humanity. Like, this
Hmm.
is a human function here. But obviously that's an extreme example. But yeah, in
Yeah.
any way, we're first primed to see what other people need. You know,
Yeah.
and so
And to
what
put ourselves last.
right? And so when we take all of that away and try and see what it is that we would do, of course, it feels absolutely like, rudderless, like you just feel like
Yeah.
you have no direction.
So, out of curiosity, in your experience, is it ever the case that a person might genuinely love a particular style or color or aesthetic on other people, but not themselves? Or is that
Oh,
always
absolutely.
indicating? Yeah.
Oh, no, no. Yeah. So I have this concept of looking at fashion like you'd look at art in a museum.
Ooh.
So when we go to a museum and we look at the art on the walls, we appreciate it, right? We appreciate it for
Yeah.
its craftsmanship, its beauty. We don't feel like we need to bring it home. Like, we
Uh-huh.
don't feel like it has to live in our house. And it's the same for fashion. I'm a great example of this. Like, I absolutely love like crazy over the top street style and very eclectic
Mm,
dressing. And I tried that for a large part of my 20s. Like, I really experimented with it. And
sure.
ultimately I was like, this makes me fucking stressed out. Like, I feel uncomfortable. I feel like people are looking at, whatever
Yeah.
it was. But in any case, yeah, absolutely. You can look at something and say like, oh, I love that outfit. I love this or
Yeah.
that. And it looks so beautiful. And also, I've done some work that I know that's not for me.
Yeah. I think that I had to go through that because aesthetically, there is that sort of boho femme vibe that is very flowy, earthy, light colors. It appeals to a certain minimalism and beauty in my brain. I have bought so many of these clothing and then never wore them because every time I put them on my body, I feel hateful. I am
Mm-hmm.
so unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I think that's kind of a weird, it's weird that we don't know that that can be a distinction almost.
Yeah, that's just one of those style things that we are not a taught, essentially. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? That and you have to, sometimes you have to try it. Sometimes you don't
Yeah.
know, and sometimes you have to try it and you have to really tune in to, how you're feeling emotionally and physically in your body, and listen to those signals.
Yeah. So you mentioned that one of the things you do with your clients when you're trying on clothes is you do it first without a mirror, which I feel like will
Mm-hmm.
blow people's minds. What is it that you draw their attention to in that first try on without a mirror?
It's really just, first is the physical feeling. Like, how does this feel on your body? Does it feel like too much fabric? Does it feel pinching? Does it
Mm,
feel stiff or itchy? I mean, really, like,
yeah.
let's tune in to just like basic sensory needs first. And then we'll talk a little bit. This is harder kind of without the mirror, but I really want to know, like, do you feel good in this? Like, do you feel like yourself in this? Do you feel cool?
Mhm. Yeah.
Like, what vibe are you? I talk a lot about
Right.
vibes.
Yeah.
But, and then, I want them to get practiced at taking in all that information and not letting the reflection color their opinion. You know what I mean? Like, I will have clients try things on and they'll say, oh, this feels amazing. It's so soft. I don't feel constricted. And by the way, some people like some constricted,
Sure.
everyone
Yeah.
is different.
Yeah.
Um, oh, I feel so, and then they'll look in the mirror and they'll say, oh, this is not really, how I
Mm,
wanted to look in this. And so then we just kind of work on either finding a balance or work on really reprioritizing with how you feel, a higher priority than how you look. And I'm
mhm.
sure you do a lot of work around this too, but
Yeah.
mirrors are not reality.
Yeah.
Photos are not reality. I have so many people come to me and say, like, oh, I thought I felt cute. And then I looked at a photo of
Oh my
myself and
God.
then,
So common.
yeah. And so I just really want to remind people that when we look in a mirror, and particularly when you're trying on clothes, it's not just you looking at your reflection. it is all those thoughts that you've
Mhm.
had over the years in trying, in dressing rooms, and that stuff colors your opinion. And so can we try and just pause,
Yeah.
just detach a bit and
Yeah.
try and get in touch with that?
So, one of the reasons that it gets so triggering for people when they catch sight of themselves in a photo or even a mirror, I think, um, in the situation you just described, is that there is an aspect of it's like a humiliation aspect of I dared to feel
Mm,
one way, good,
mm,
cute, confident, whatever.
mhm,
And then I dared to feel good, and then I was confronted with evidence that I was unworthy of that feeling.
That's a really good
And
way to put it.
those are the moments that I feel like teach us that we're not trustworthy, right? Because that's
100%.
a moment that says, your feelings, shut that shit down and ask other people, because that's the
Right.
real information.
Right. Yeah. And it's so fascinating as we're talking about this because our brains lie to us too. You know what I mean? It's
Totally.
it's very hard to figure out like which messages from my body do I listen to. I have another story. I feel like I could. I just told my husband the other night. I was like, I feel like I should write a book with just clients' experiences, or their stories. I could
Yeah,
just love
totally.
hearing people's stories. In any case, there was someone in my group program, and she shared with all of us that she had put on an outfit. She felt really cute. She felt really good. She went to Target. She caught her reflection in the freezer doors,
Hmm.
and she just, like, her heart just fell because she was like, ugh, this doesn't
Oh,
look good. I'm
yeah.
not. And then she went around the corner to the next aisle, and this woman walks by her, and I was like, oh, I love your outfit. And then she was back to being happy and feeling good.
Ooh, yeah.
It's hard to know when to trust things. And so in that instance, what I would want to say to that person is, okay, you felt good before you caught that reflection. Can we hold on to that? And can
Yeah.
we see the reflection as the part that's lying to you?
Yeah. Also, I mean, one of the reasons I was so excited to have you on is my whole definition of body neutrality is the ability to look at the process and ability of looking at your body and other people's bodies without the added meaning and interpretation that we've learned to apply to different things. So really what you're talking about here is like she had almost like the freezer doors had a meaning, right? Like the freezer doors said to her, you're actually gross or ugly or whatever the thing was, right? And it's that meaning that causes distress. And then the lady in the next aisle gave her a different meaning. The meaning was, you look good. This is nice. So, like, I think part of the skill that we're talking about here of sort of developing that internal centering around style and really everything is the ability to notice that meaning is subjective. And if it's subjective and nobody gets the final say on it, who what's your plan? Just like bounce around and take in everybody else's or form your own?
Right. And almost have a plan for that happening because you know it's going to
Yeah.
happen, and plan ahead of time. Whose opinion am I going to
Right.
fall back on? Which opinion of
Yes.
those crazy things that are going through my head, which of those am I going to trust? And again, just that working on it being like,
Totally.
how I feel, or how I, like the way those colors go together, whatever it
Yeah.
is. Like, I know I like that. I know I'm going to go out in the world and, be potentially unhappy. And then I just have to remember that was the truth.
Yeah. It feels like this would be easier to do in some other ways. Like if someone I always say if somebody called you like a blue crocodile or something, you wouldn't be offended, right? You would just be like, "Oh, I disagree. That's false
That's
information
just
that you I
wrong.
don't know where you got that information, but it's just not true." So we trust ourselves when it comes to certain things, but then because particularly the focus placed on appearance being for other people and other people being, it's subjective, everyone's got their own opinion, it really screws us over, and it just feels, I think, like that constant roller coaster of confidence. I feel good, I feel gross, I feel good,
Mhm.
and that can happen all in one, like, 10-minute Target trip, right?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think by reflecting back, on, there's like kind of a meme or a cliche that is like, you didn't feel unattractive when you were 2 years old. Like that was
Mm-hmm.
laid on top of you, you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And just remembering, and for me, in my work, literally identifying and pinpointing when did those moments happen?
Mm.
Again, when were you taught your body was wrong?
Yeah.
And then we can point to those when that crazy roller coaster of I feel
Totally.
good, I feel bad, again, and our brains don't always work in the moment when we need them to, but the goal would be to remember in that moment, oh, I feel this way because when I was 4, my mom said that dress is too small for you, or
Yeah.
whatever it was.
Yeah. I have clients do something similar around identifying the meaning because it just strips the thing of its power when you're like, "Oh, I'm feeling fat right now and I'm distressed about it." But the distress I'm feeling is based on the meaning I've assigned, which says that in order to have value in the world, I have to be thin. And just even naming that, you're immediately like a little bit more embodied, a little bit more grounded. The thing no longer quite knocks you over. It's still
Mhm.
there. You're still like maybe not
Right,
happy with it, but it
right.
does take some of the sting out. Okay, so I have this question for you, and I think a lot of people who are listening are probably on board because this is the people who listen to my work are going to be like, yes, like let's break the rules, screw the male gaze. We're not going to dress to be flattering anymore. But I also think the flip side of that sort of devil's advocate that comes in is, but what about the when the rules are accurate? Or like, what about if I really should or shouldn't dress in this color or this thing? Like, how do we understand that some stuff is probably going to look better or worse on different people without getting trapped by the external rules or making it about other people's approval?
I just disagree with the whole premise of the question.
I love it. Say more.
I mean, you said, what do we do when the rules are accurate? I think that's all subjective.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And then you continued and you said, something about like when something actually does look better on us. Says who?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's my answer.
I love it. Okay, so I had jotted down from our first chat that you said you get to decide.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I think probably the way I phrased it doesn't really give you the space to even answer it because I presumed that it
Yeah.
wasn't subjective, right? But
Yeah.
of course, they're all subjective.
Yeah. And I mean, I would just say, you and I talked about like the kind of the color consulting kind
Yeah,
of
yeah, color season.
industry and all of those things. And, my answer for everything is always going to go back to, well, what do you like?
Yeah.
And so if you get your colors done and you're like, heck yeah, man, like this looks awesome. I feel so much better.
Yeah.
And if it, reduces some sort of anxiety by, you know, narrowing your choices to a few colors, like awesome, good for you,
Mhm.
use that. My problem is when you get told to wear colors you don't actually like, or that you don't, again, feel good in. Again, I made that
Yeah, yeah.
example earlier about like, because of my coloring, I should wear red. No, no, I shouldn't. I
Yeah.
don't feel good in red. Um, so yeah, I think with everything, and there almost has to be a reaction to the reaction sometimes, which is, for instance, I had a client who, and this is, again, this is that kind of like, can feminists choose, whatever we want to do? Or
Right, right.
is it, this kind of argument that I see going on right now on TikTok is like this, like, are trad wives really choosing? Is it a feminist choice for them
Right,
to stay
yeah.
home and just cook and clean? Um, and so the question for me is always going to be colored by our societal conditioning. So again, I had this client once who, once we went through this whole process, it turned out she really did love very feminine, hourglass type silhouettes. Like that was, and in fact, she
Yeah.
was the president of a department, or the head, I don't know, what do you call it, a president? I don't know. She was the chair. That's what it was.
Yeah, yeah.
The chair of a department at a university. And so she was in a real leadership role. And she really felt like she should be wearing suits, very professionalism is a whole
Hmm.
other topic we could go very far into, but she really felt like she had to kind of mute her
Yeah.
personality and her style in order to be in this leadership role. And so what we worked on together was, this is what you really love. Can you have such confidence and trust in your own expertise that you can show up in a pretty 1950s dress
Yeah.
and still command the respect you deserve, because you have that knowledge regardless of what you wear. You have that
Yeah.
expertise regardless of what you wear. So again, it's like, is it really a choice?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is she conditioned in some way? Probably, but
Sure.
we all are. And so, you know, again, and I would just say the only distinction is that's because that's what she likes, not because it
Right.
somehow looks better on her.
Totally. I also really love about that it continuously reinforces the fact that the information that you're looking for is actually inside you. You don't need the external rules. Because if in fact what you prefer is a cinched waist and, this color palette and like certain silhouettes that the external rules were going to tell you to wear, you can still find that out without the rules. Like that's all going to
Right.
be in there.
Right.
And if
Yeah.
that's not what you like, then those rules are going to do a whole bunch of harm and make you really confused and insecure. So, like, literally, what is the point of the rules then?
Well, it is, I mean, since you asked, it is to occupy women with these superficial, what's the word I'm looking for? Just, pursuits or
Yeah.
occupations that keep us from fighting our oppression.
Hell yeah.
That's,
It keeps us busy and it
mhm,
keeps us small, not even
mhm,
just physically, although sure that too, but like it keeps us from being in our power when we don't
mhm,
trust ourselves.
mhm, 100%.
So, okay, this is the big question here that people say, I just don't like how my clothes fit, or I just wish my clothes fit different. This is like often sort of the first thing I hear with a new
Mhm,
client when they're telling me what they're unhappy with.
mhm.
Could you speak to both what is usually meant by that and also how you address it?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think it's maybe helpful information sometimes. I mean, our bodies and the clothing can give us some helpful information, but it's how we interpret it, right? That is, could be harmful to us. And so, your clothes not fitting well is an indication that your body has changed in some way,
If they
right?
used to and now they don't.
Yeah, and so there's grief around that we have to work through, and there's attempting to come to a place of acceptance for that.
Yeah.
And also, yeah, almost always when I hear someone say, "Oh, that I don't like how that fits," it's almost always because they're in a smaller size than they should be. And there is so much conditioning around the fact that you should not go up to the next size. You should now attempt to change your body back into the size that it
Right.
used to be. Probably my most like viral Instagram post was just one of those quote things that says, "Build a wardrobe to fit your body, not a body to fit your wardrobe."
Right. Oh, so good.
Yeah. So and then I also, there's two more things. I hope I remember them both. But I also always want to say, like, yeah, there's going to be discomfort when something is different, no matter what it is. If you get a new job or you move to a different neighborhood or you even, I don't know, whatever small example there might be, there's always some discomfort and some unfamiliarity. And of course, that's part of what I'm sure you work on with your clients,
Yeah.
is just the gradual acknowledgement of that. And, I personally, in my experience, it has just taken time. It's always taken time. Um, and then the last thing is that if you don't like the way your clothes fit, it's because those clothes weren't made for you. And, and you have to understand. I always prep my clients by saying, we're going to try on 10 things. I mean, it's usually 50 or 60, but we're going to try on 10 things and one is going to work for you.
Yeah.
That's the actual, across all shapes and sizes, that's the actual like statistical results that I've seen over 10
Yeah.
years of doing this. So, um, you have to, unfortunately, if you have something that you don't like the way it fits, it's just not, you shouldn't have bought it. You should have
Yeah.
tried it on and been like, oh, this doesn't work. And you should have kept trying. And I get that that takes a lot of time and energy,
Yeah.
and it really does. But, I call it playing the fit lottery. Like, you just have to try enough things. If you hit on a piece that works for you, great, you won the lottery, literally.
Mm. Okay, so the fit lottery, I love. I think it normalizes this idea that we sort of have of like, thin, hot people are like happier. We also just imagine they would have an easier time buying clothes, right? Like it's a fantasy. I mean, obviously they have more privilege, they have a lot of advantages, but if everybody is sort of statistically has to try on a certain amount of clothes, then we shouldn't be feeling bad or blaming ourselves or our bodies when 9 pieces of clothing fit poorly.
Yeah.
And then there's also, I think, something about like, yes, when you've gained weight, whether through the intuitive eating process or any number of things going on in your life, people hold on to those clothes for a lot of reasons, emotional attachment, a desire to lose the weight again. But there's also, I think, like one of the rules that we have, kind of like with diet culture, it says basically you should eat as little as possible without having negative consequences. That's sort of the vague, even among people who think they're presenting like healthy nutritional information, it's like you should just minimize calories without getting sick, basically. So I think there's something similar when we go clothes shopping. It's like you should get the smallest possible size without it not fitting. So,
Hmm.
or we're getting the ones that fit, but like skin tight, barely fit. So on a puffy day, literally, it's not going to fit anymore.
Hmm.
And I feel like there's like an attachment to the number, maybe the size number, or just a sense that, if one of our rules was don't get swallowed up by your clothes, it's more flattering to have it fit the body. There is a major resistance in my clientele to buying clothes that are maybe a half size up rather than a half
Hmm.
size down.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is a good opening for me to talk about like the real scarcity issues that people in larger bodies
Sure, yeah.
find, as much as everything I've said just now, like wear what you want, don't listen to external rules. There becomes an issue when you're a body that clothes are not made in your size. I mean, it's real hard
Absolutely.
to have your ideal personal style when you have no clothes to choose from.
Yeah.
Um, and so you would not, well, you would believe, you would believe the amount of times I've heard from a client that if they could fit into the largest size at a particular mall store, like Banana Republic is the one that I'm thinking of, that felt like a win. And it also felt like a bit of like, there's a real grief when you start to transition out of what we call straight sizes, which is usually up to, 10 or 12 or
Right.
14. There's a real grief when you have to size up to not only the next size, but like a whole nother sizing system. And
Yeah.
I find there's a very large gray area, like almost a no man's land of the sizes between a 14 in straight sizes and a 14 in plus sizes. They're
Huh.
cut on a different pattern. A 14W or a 14 in plus sizes is not the same size as a 14 in a straight size store. And there are
Hmm.
many women who kind of fit somewhere in that cusp where there's actually not a lot of options. They're not small enough for the straight size stores. They're not big enough
Yeah.
for the plus size stores. That was maybe neither here nor there, but
Oh, that's an infuriating fact.
yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. And just again, that reason to know that like it's not your body, it's the clothing
Yeah.
industry.
Yeah.
There's all this just really fucked up ways of functioning in
Yeah.
that industry. But it's definitely the size on the tag sometimes. I had one client, this was kind of an extreme situation, but she was just at a place in her journey where she really could not look at the size on the tag. And in fact, she had her partner cover all of them up when we were trying on.
Wow.
Um, but again, then when you start to size out of what's available, there's a real panic that sets in,
Yeah.
which is completely valid and completely understandable because there does become a scarcity of options
Yeah.
for you. So some of it is not stuff we can think our way out of. Some of it is systemic
Right.
stuff.
Absolutely. And there's a big difference too between like the meaning associated with, like a size 8 versus a size 10, which mostly is going to be sort of in your own head, the meaning of what it makes you worth or your value or whatever, and the meaning between being able to buy straight size clothes and not.
Yeah.
Because literally, I mean, yeah, the options change. All of a sudden, you better get real comfortable with cold shoulder, big print tops, right? Like now you
Yeah.
don't get to have the same kind of
Right.
options. That meaning is going to be a lot more tempting in a lot of
Right.
ways to hold on to the smaller clothes
Right.
or to change your body to meet them.
Right.
And I do find also in my practice that cusp is a very particular
Hmm.
challenge for a lot of people in terms of clothing.
Yeah. And again, I think just acknowledging them and saying, like, you're in a really bad spot right here. Like,
Yeah.
essentially, in the clothing world, if you're in that in between straight and plus, it's very difficult. And then, of course, if you're above like a size 26 or something, or above a size 3X, then it's very hard. That's the hardest, of
Yep.
course. But that in between phase is very hard. And by just saying to someone like, yeah, this is going to be extra tough for you. I'm sorry, and
Yeah.
this is the industry
Oh, that's
problem
beautiful.
why
Yeah.
this is happening.
Yeah. And recognizing, I think too, that like there is a lot of belonging in any of these areas, that marginalization makes you feel like you don't belong. And if you're in the 26 plus, you are just straight. People are saying we don't want your kind of people on this
Yep.
planet. Like it's pretty cut and dry.
Yep.
And when you're in the middle, it's like, oh, you're so close to having
Hmm.
belonging, but not
Hmm.
quite. And it's like a
Hmm.
tease. It brings up a different
Hmm.
emotional, you have to go through a different emotional process, I think, to work within that.
Yeah.
Okay, this was all amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. I think the work you do is incredible. I didn't even really get to like have you talk about the steps you go through with your clients. Anybody who's listening, please go find Dacy's work and check it out. It's so amazing. She was describing to me like the actual process that she takes clients through, and it's so aligned with the work I do and so cool. So Dacy, can you tell people where to find you on the internet?
Yeah, I would love to. So my website is mindfulcloset.com. And the group program that I mentioned is starting a new round soon. And so if you go to mindfulcloset.com/making-space, you'll find the information about that group program. And I'm on social media at Mindful Closet.
Is the making space about like making space in your closet? Is that kind of the
And mentally too.
I
Yeah,
love it.
letting go of really letting go of those ideas that we've been taught to make space
Oh,
for what you want, you know?
so good. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. Everyone who's listening, I hope that this brings new insights around the clothing thing. It's a big question, and it's not one that I often find other professionals actually aligning with me on. I'm like, I can get stuff out of each conversation, but this is rare, and it was a real treat. So
Hmm.
thank you so much for being here, and thank you everyone for listening, and I will catch you next week. Hi everyone, I'm Dacy Nealand. I just want to take a moment to thank you for watching this video. I put out new episodes of my podcast every Tuesday, so be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so that you don't miss those, and feel free to leave me a comment. If you are looking for more information about body neutrality or you want to work with me, you can always find me at my website, jessynealand.com, or you can purchase my book, Body Neutral, a revolutionary guide to overcoming body image issues, wherever you buy books, ebooks, or audiobooks. We can also connect on Instagram or TikTok. My handle is Jessie Nealand. And I make this podcast for free and without any sponsors or ads. So if you want to support my show, you can use the Patreon link in the show notes, and know that your support is always very much appreciated. Lastly, thank you to my brother, Jason Nealand, for creating the music that plays at the beginning of the show. And thank you for listening, learning, and moving toward personal and collective body liberation.